I want to start with, what do you think about what's happening in Israel and Palestine, actually?
Well, obviously the Israelis, as they've been doing for 50 years now or more, made a provocation that our brothers in Palestine felt that they could not any longer tolerate. And you know something that I read that's very interesting, not unlike what in the last 2002, today Hamas said that they had information Israel was planning a major attack into Gaza in the next couple of weeks. And so it was a preemptive strike.
Yes.
The preemptive strike for the provocation that it was not only a reactive they were doing in Jerusalem, but it was also a preemptive what Israel strike, because Hamas said that they had information that Israel was getting ready to come back into Gaza real hard in the next couple of weeks. So, you know, as Vladimir Putin said many years ago, he said, when I was a kid in St. Petersburg, back then, of course, it was Stalingrad. Yeah. And he said, there is a fight that is inevitable. If the fight cannot be escaped, then it's always better to hit first. And that's exactly what Russia did in 2022 before the Ukrainian offensive that was planned for the next week. And apparently it seems it's quite possible that that's what Hamas is doing right now against the IDF.
Okay. It makes sense.
It seems like they're kicking ass as far as I can see so far. I mean, you know, the IDF isn't in Gaza showing totally blown up military bases. They haven't captured any Hamas generals, unlike Hamas, who has captured already a brigadier general of the IDF.
Yes.
And many IDF soldiers, including at least 2 females that I know of, that are being treated quite humanely so far, as well they should be. So, it's, and Hezbollah has not even started working yet.
So do you think Hezbollah will join?
If need be, they will join, and it will be like a giant hurricane plus a tornado.
How long do you expect this will last, this situation we are observing?
It's not going to get over anytime soon, man. This is the biggest military confrontation between Islam and Israel in decades. It already is the biggest. Don't you agree?
Yeah, I do. Definitely.
So it's not going to be like, oh, next weekend we're all going back to the way things were before. No. This is major. This is it's another one of those dates that millions of people are going to remember from now on, as there was before and then there was after.
So any military aid that America wants to send to Israel, it's kind of too late, isn't it?
Yes, it really is. And it's not, do you understand? And listen, bro, I'm absolutely not anti-Semitic. I'm not against Jewish people at all. I'm against Zionists. I'm against Pharisees. I'm against the IDF, just like I'm against the CIA and the U.S. Army, which, of course, I used to be a U.S. Army soldier way back a long time ago. But I can tell you that this is a history-making event, and so far, the good guys are winning, because the good guys are not the IDF and they are not the Zionists.
So you would also define the IDF. Do you define them as the same as the Zionist?
Of course. I mean, how else is there to define them? I mean, I interviewed a friend of mine here who is a Spetsnaz drone pilot. The other day, I made a video. You can see it on my Telegram channel.
I saw that one. I saw that one.
Yeah, okay. And you remember when he said, I saw this guy, he was wounded, came back with another bomb to kill him. And I saw him looking up. I saw his eyes. You remember when he said that?
Yes.
And he pulled the trigger on him anyway.
Yes.
Because he was a fucking Nazi, because he came to Donbass to kill people like my friend and his friends and civilians. So, as Alexander Nevsky, the great Russian hero, said centuries ago, if you come to Russia with a weapon in your hand, by a weapon, you will die.
With a sword.
True.
With a sword in your hand, by the sword, you will die.
What about the settlers in the south of Israel? How do you look at them?
As complete criminals. How else can any honest person look at them? Look at the crimes they do. They beat up little old ladies and little kids. They chop down olive orchards. They steal people's houses who've been living there for decades. They they walk around with the M16. How else is there to look at them? How do I look at a rapist or a murderer? The same way. There's no such thing. Settlers, it's just, the other word for Israeli settlers is pirates, thieves, brigands. I mean, how else can you look at it?
How do you think that Hamas should deal with the settlers?
Justice tempered with mercy. There's literally been, and I don't remember the dude's name. He was a Jewish guy, IDF soldier, I think, got captured. This one Jewish prisoner of war got traded for 1,100 Hamas prisoners of war.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, it was some years ago, and it's, I don't know the exact details, but I believe that's the story. And whether it's true or not, that's how Hamas should deal with the settlers. Go get them. The people that are living in somebody else's house on Palestinian land, Hamas goes, surrounds them, says, all right, come along, your whole family, the kids too. You can leave the dog, but you're coming with us, and we're going to trade you for Palestinian prisoners, of which there's thousands that have been there for decades, in Israeli prisoners in prisons. Say we're going to trade you for our guys to let them come home, or we're going to trade you for some land, or we're going to trade you for some money. Don't torture them, don't murder them. Don't make terrible videos like the Ukrainian Nazis make with our prisoners of war from the Russian side. We just say, all right, you're coming with us. Your value is going to get paid right now.
Makes sense. It makes sense.
I mean, and you know what? And it's justice, and it's tempered with mercy, which is the exact right way to always be. You don't have to kill every one of them. Anyone that's shooting at you, you have the right to shoot back right between the eyes.
What about
But go
do,
ahead.
do you think that Hamas has bigger plans than what we are seeing unfold right now?
I hope so. I hope so. I hope it's not just, another symbolic act, Intifada 3 or 4, whatever. Go ahead, man. It's time. How long has this thing been going on? This is the biggest, you know, military conflict in decades. Let's go ahead and get what it's worth. You know, Hamas says, make a deal with Israel. Say, you know what? We got all these prisoners. We're not letting any of them go until this deal is done. Complete autonomy, UN, whatever observers or whatever that aren't gonna, let Israel, airstrike and bomb, the center of civilian areas. I mean, if you start a war, it ought to be worth something. And I'm not saying the Palestinians started it, because it was Israeli provocations and the upcoming Israeli offensive that caused Hamas to do what they did.
So if you were to kind of predict the scale of this in terms of time, how long do you think this is going to last?
Who can tell, man? Anyone that says they, I mean, I'm not stupid enough to give an opinion. It started less than 48 hours ago. Who knows how long it can last? It's like saying, how long do you think the Maidan is going to last back in, February of 2014? No one knows. Anyone that says they know is talking out of their ass. Nobody knows. This could be the big one, bro. This could be the start of World War III. This could burn down the world. This could, it could fizzle out in a week, although I seriously doubt that. I think that this will be a catalyst for major change, and I hope it won't be the start of World War III. But other than those two opinions, I have no idea, and no one does. It's very serious situation, though. That's anyone that has any sense at all knows that it's very, very serious.
Maybe the catalyst for major change is World War III, and it's unavoidable.
Maybe. How else do you think the world's going to end anyway?
I think when
Sooner or later.
Yes, I think when the American hegemony is desperate enough, they will definitely unleash World War III.
I think you might be right. I think you might probably be right.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Do you have anything else you want to add to the situation regarding Israel, Palestine?
I just want to say that, I'm not anti-Semitic. I respect Jewish people. I'm an Orthodox Christian. Jesus Christ is my Savior. He was a Jew. I'm not against Jews. It was the Pharisees that murdered him, the rich Jews that used the Roman Empire as their attack dogs, just like rich Jews now use the United States military and government that they own and control as their attack dogs. I'm against Pharisees. I'm against Zionists. Palestine is Palestine. The Israelis should be able to live there as, equals with Palestinians, but not as their masters. Not, I mean, Israel has gone in there and they've done what the Boers did to South Africa, and it's not right. And one of these days it's going to have to stop. And maybe what's happened in the last couple of days is going to, be the Nelson Mandela moment for the apartheid state of Israel. But, I wish all good Jewish people well, and I know that there are millions of them. But the Pharisees, the ones who want to control the world, ones who steal land from Palestinians, I wish them hell.
Have you seen how the people from Kiev are blaming Putin for what Hamas is doing in Israel? And what do you think about that?
What do I care? I mean, the only reason to watch Ukrainian propaganda, which is really just American propaganda, I mean, all you have to do is look at it and know that, the truth is 180 degrees the opposite of what they're saying. And that's it, period. I'm sure one thing that'll be very interesting, and I believe it will come to pass, is that in the next few days, Hamas will come out, just like the Russians did, in early 2022. They came out and they said, look, we have the attack plans of the Ukrainian army that was planning to go into Donbass in a major military offensive with 150,000 soldiers, heavy army, artillery, air power, the whole 9 yards. And that's why Russia came in and stopped it. And thank God and Vladimir Putin that they did. And I think if Hamas can come out and show the same kind of evidence, the same kind of military plans, in which they say that they knew this was going to happen. So I believe it's quite likely that they do have this evidence. Then, thank God that they did what they did. They did the right thing, and they prevented another genocide, and I'm all for preventing genocide.
As Russia intervened in Ukraine in 2022 to stop the genocide of the ethnically Russians in Ukraine, in the Donbass. Do you think Russia should have done that before?
That's a good question. And yes, I do. Yes, I do think they should have done it before. And you know what? It was a big mistake that they didn't. If they had come in 2014, like they did in 2022, it would have saved, at this point, hundreds of thousands of human lives on both sides. So yes, I do think they should have come in. But there's political considerations. Back in 2014, the Russian army, the Russian military was not at all in good state. Back then, the Russian economy was still quite vulnerable. Back then, Russia did not know if they could count on China as an ally. And it might have seemed like a suicidal mission to, take on Ukraine, which means NATO, which means the most of the Western world, by Russia all by itself. I mean, I don't pretend to know more than what the guys in the Kremlin know. I also don't pretend that they are infallible by any means. And they have made some serious mistakes since 2014. And, I think that any serious person that looks at the history and the economic, military, political situation over the last almost 10 years now, from 2014, you know, any serious analyst would have to say Russia could have taken care of this a lot easier and a lot less costly back in 2014 or 15 or 16 than how they're doing it today. And I was here in 2014 and 15 and 16. I've been here ever since 2014. And I can tell you from being on the ground here in Donetsk that from here it certainly looks like it would have been they could have gotten done what they're still trying to do for a fraction of what they've already paid if they'd done it back then.
Do you think Russia, part of the reasons why Russia might not have intervened earlier could have been exactly what you said? They were not military prepared enough. They needed China, they needed BRICS, they needed South Africa, they needed to prepare for the sanctions. They basically needed all of these puzzles to come to the right set before they actually intervened. So could it be that everything was like calculated and predicted to what would happen?
Yes, it could be. And I hope that that's the case. Whether I believe it or not is a different story. But if this is all some, brilliant long-range plan, I'll be very glad to see the successful results of it. I haven't seen them yet. A lot of people here in Donbass haven't seen it yet. We're still waiting and wondering. For 10 years, the Ukraine Nazis have been less than 10 miles from where I'm sitting right now in the center of Donetsk city. And they're still there tonight. And they're still bombing the city whenever they want to.
Yesterday, there were reports that Donbass became more quieter. Have you heard about this?
Of course I have, dude. I live in Donetsk, bro. I'm sitting here, I don't have to look at the internet or the news to see how the shelling is going in Donetsk. I just listen to my window, bro. I listen out my window. I get real-time news from the source. When they bomb Donetsk, I can hear it from my window.
So you would say it has something has changed since yesterday, then, right?
No, not since yesterday. Over the last 2 weeks, and still understand, dude, they still bomb this city with heavy artillery every day. Not just Donbass, the city of Donetsk and all of Donbass. Every day they still bomb it. They've been bombing the civilians in the city somewhat less for the last couple of weeks. They targeted, in the last 2 weeks, they targeted Denis Pushilin, who's like the head of the DPR. They hit his office with a couple of heavy-duty rockets. They targeted the mayor of Gorlovka and the city administration of Gorlovka, basically blew up the whole administration building in Gorlovka. That's the two biggest cities in the DPR. And they also fired against Alexander Khodakovsky, who's the commander of Vostok, one of the great heroes of the DPR. They missed where he was staying. They missed it by 10, 20 meters with two HIMARS, and they tried to kill him, one of the greatest heroes in the history of the DPR. So they're targeting political leadership in the last couple of weeks. More so, they're targeting political leadership and military targets more so than just random civilian targets in the last 2 weeks. That's the change that's happened. in the last 2 weeks.
Do you know which territories is being used on behalf of Ukraine to keep shelling Donbass and Donetsk?
Of course. Just west of Mariinka, northwest of Avdiivka. I mean, the front line in the city of Donetsk is still very, very, basically, you can say it's the city limits. You know, from the airport where I fought in 2014 and 2015, which is the northern city limits, it's 6 or 7 miles from where I'm sitting right now, bro. And from there, it's still less than 6 or 7 more miles to the Ukrainian area, to Ukrainian lines, Ukrainian bases, Ukrainian positions. You know, heavy artillery has like, 14, 15 miles at the max.
Okay.
Basically 15 kilometers is basically most of it. And they're still here. They can still hit us with conventional artillery. So 15 kilometers, they're still there after 10 years.
Why haven't Russia prioritized Adrivka if that's obviously where they're shelling from?
That's an excellent question, bro. And there's, every single person in Donetsk has been asking that question since long before the special military operation. Donetsk is the jewel of Donbass. And yet, it's been smashed. It's still being hit every day. Civilians are dying here, and who can say what the reason is? I cannot say. I do not know why. And there's a lot of people that are pissed off and tired about it too, and don't care why. They just want to see it get done. They want to see, don't want to see the UCROPs get moved back out of artillery range. They don't want to see them get moved back to the edge of Donetsk Oblast. They don't want to see them get moved back to the Dnieper River. They want to see them get moved back to the other side, the western side of Kiev. And then we got something to talk about. Then the job gets done, the denazification, the demilitarization. When Russia controls Kiev and everything east of it, including Odessa, down to the northern tip of Moldova, then that's the minimum where they can say that they've denazified and demilitarized Ukraine.
So you are under the impression that Russia will have to take control of Kiev in order to stabilize the situation?
Bro, you remember the Second World War, right?
Yeah.
They took control of Kiev then. They can do it again, and they need to do it again. The only thing that will stop NATO from continuing provocations and escalations is overwhelming military defeat. The minimum, the nice thing that Russia can do is take Kiev, everything east of it, and tell NATO, look, remember your history. 80 years ago, we went all the way to Berlin. 100 years before that, we went all the way to Paris. And so you can either, quit pissing us off, or we're going again. And that's and you can see, and if Russia approves an overwhelming military victory in Ukraine, NATO is a paper tiger. all of the NATO militaries in Europe combined, and right now Poland is the most powerful NATO army in Europe, but all of them combined, Russia can whip them if they want. I mean, if they're allowed to, can whip them in a month, can literally go back to Paris if they want. And they need to show that. They need to demonstrate that fact overwhelmingly, not just so that the government and the parasites that own the governments of Europe and the other NATO countries understand that Russia has taken off the gloves and they're not kidding around anymore, but that the people of those countries, that the people who live in Berlin can go, look at a book and say, oh, I remember what Berlin looked like in 1945. And if we let our government keep pissing off the Russians, it's going to look like that again. Then, Russia can, by teaching a friendly lesson, can achieve the peace that it needs, the security that it needs, without having to go to Berlin or to Paris or to London or further.
Do you think that America's goal is to exit Ukraine or to escalate the situation in Ukraine by either involving a country like Poland?
The goal is to escalate and continue escalating until they're stopped, bro. The United States is across the Atlantic Ocean. Everything that they do, I mean, it's the same thing as the Second World War. What the United States wants to do is start as much trouble as possible in Ukraine, in Eastern Europe, in Western Europe. I mean, the United States blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. That was an act of economic terrorism, which, the lick spittle lapdogs that sit in the German government, their country may never recover from it. If they let that happen. So, Europe's biggest enemy is not Russia, it's the United States.
That's right.
Who's trying to do everything that they can to, they're trying to do to Europe right now what they've done to Yugoslavia, to Afghanistan, to Iraq, to Libya, to Syria. They're trying to turn it into, third world failed states, man.
Do you think they will succeed in that?
I hope not. How the hell do I know? Let's watch and see, but I certainly hope not. I lived in Europe. I've been all over Europe, dude. I lived in Germany for 2 years when I was in the US Army back in the 1980s when it was still the Cold War. And it was pretty cool back then. I traveled all over, Austria, England, Scotland, Ireland, Amsterdam, Italy, all over Germany, and it was really cool back then. But what I see now, it's like the United States. I left the United States 10 years ago, and I doubt that I could even recognize it if I went back there again today. I was born in 1960, bro. I remember back when the United States wasn't something to be embarrassed about. Not that it was ever perfect by a long shot, but I remember back when it was cool. And I've seen it decline, going downhill, from 1980 to 2000, and then falling off the cliff in 2000. Where it is is a
If
place that
America wanted to,
lead.
if they wanted to escalate in Ukraine, they would. It just seems like NATO seems like they're out of weapons and out of everything that makes sense, and they don't even have that many soldiers. So if
You
how,
ever heard of F-16s, bro? You ever heard of these tactical nukes? Where do you think they're going from here? They're going to keep escalating as long as they're not terrified. I mean, what Russia needs to do is smash down on Ukraine in a way and say, straight up to them, maybe not in public, but just have Lavrov go and look. Say, look what we did to Kiev. You see Zelensky hanging on that lamppost like Mussolini, upside down, with his wife, who just spent $1,100,000 on jewelry in New York while Zelensky was begging at the UN for more money. You see how they're hanging upside down in front of that gas station like Mussolini and his old lady? We're going to come do that to you in Berlin, in Paris.
so essentially Putin needs to talk to the European leaders, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're Nazis, bro. They are the Nazis of the 21st century. The people that own the United States government own the British government, the French government, the Italian government, right down the line, the German government. Olaf Scholz, this Bauerbachter or whatever her name. These people are scum. They're genuine Nazis. Look at Canada, dude. Look what happened in Canada. Chrystia Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, who's really the one that wears the pants and runs the show. Trudeau is just the prancing butt boy, the Ronald Reagan, or the Biden, the puppet that they put out there for all the idiots to look at while somebody else behind the throne runs the show. In Canada, it's Chrystia Freeland, who is the granddaughter of a Nazi collaborator, Ukrainian Nazi collaborator. And they just have this, German, Ukrainian Nazi collaborator who the whole Canadian Parliament got up and clapped for because he fought against the Russians, just, collaborating with Hitler. These people, there's no trust in them. The only thing they understand is force. The sooner that they're kicked to the ground and made to understand that for them to push against humanity any further will be their demise, the better.
I also noticed that the Speaker of the House in Canada, of the Parliament, that he got responsibility for that ovation, even though Zelensky and Trudeau had multiple meetings with that Nazi before and after, and that these scheduled meetings never went away. So even though that they gave the speaker the accountability, it wasn't really his fault, and all of them there gave him the ovation, including the defense minister of Canada, who refused to apologize.
Mm-hmm. Of course. I mean, the Speaker of the House of the Canadian Parliament, who's also a piece of shit, of course, but he was the fall guy. He was the chump.
Yeah.
He was the patsy. And so he was the guy that had to take the fall. But only idiots don't understand who planned it all. I mean, that dude, he just read a speech. He shows up and they say, all right, read this speech and act like you like it. And then when there's pushback, when there's like bad publicity, he's the chump that has to take the fall, but of course, Trudeau and Zelensky and Chrystia Freeland, that was like a trial balloon to see how far they could go with their pro-Nazi propaganda.
And they've done an ovation for a Nazi before in Canada in '87. The same thing happened.
There, the number of Nazis in Canada is only exceeded by the number of Nazis, and I'm talking about Ukrainian Nazis, war criminals, SS, hardcore Nazis that were helped to escape at the end of the Second World War and who were brought to North America and South America. Thousands of them, probably tens of thousands. And they're still there, and their grandchildren and their children are still there who are raised up. I mean, it's like, if you're some racist hillbilly, and you're like, prejudiced against black people, and you raise kids up from when they're 3 years old, saying, oh, black people, they're stupid and dirty and they're bad and, they're not like us. Well, the same thing if you're a Ukraine Nazi and you say, oh, Russians or communists or whatever, they're dirty and bad and they're not like us. That's how people get brainwashed. And there's a lot of brainwashed people in the world these days.
You said you liked America in the old days. Does Russia remind you of that, or is it different in Russia now?
It exactly reminds me of America in the old days, bro. And I mean, okay, you understand, I was born in 1960, so I grew up in the heyday of America, the best days. I mean, so before the Second World War, it was a global depression, which also included the United States. It was, the Great Depression. People were losing their homes, losing their farms. They were homeless. They were like transient workers. They're very poor, like almost starving, sometimes actually starving in the United States. And then came the Second World War. And so the U.S. industry was restarted. And understand this, the U.S. industry was restarted by making weapons, not for the U.S. military, but for the Russian military and the British military, lend-lease. So they were making weapons and selling them to other people to do the fighting for them. Does that sound familiar today? What's the United States doing right now? The whole economy of the U.S., what's left of it is weapons makers, and they're making weapons not to defend the U.S., but to sell to Banderistan. And so the economic depression in the United States was ended by U.S. industry gearing back up and hiring people to make weapons for people in other countries to use. And then the U.S. went into the Second World War. American soldiers, my grandfather was a tank commander in Patton's Army, the Third Army. He went up through Italy all the way to Germany. The American soldiers that fought in the United States military in the Second World War in Europe and in the Pacific, were genuine heroes. And when they came back after that war, they were tough, badass dudes that, weren't going back to live, on slave wages. And the people that have always owned and controlled the U.S. government understood that, if they didn't give, some advances in quality of life to these guys, that they would burn them down. That these guys who came back from the war, they're like, hey, we know how to shoot, and if somebody wants to, rip us off and treat us like a slave, we can do some more fighting. We just beat the Nazis in Europe. We can beat them here too. And they never did because they got paid off. But that paying off, the GI Bill, where it was free college, Imagine in the United States these days, free college, and of course, it was only for the guys who were heroes and risked their lives and lived. But my grandfather, he went to free college, on the GI Bill. And, and that was a good thing. And I mean, and he had a successful life. He was an insurance salesman and working himself. My grandmother did not work. She raised 2 children, stayed at home. My grandfather worked 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And he had a nice house. He had a pool in the backyard. He had a car for himself and a car for his wife. He put both his kids through college on one income from one job. And it wasn't like some big shot executive job. And so those were the heydays. But then in the 1980s, when Ronald Reagan came in and they started squeezing, and they never have stopped,
Do you think that Russia could be prone to adopting mistakes that America also did with what they're heading into now?
They already have. They already made a lot of the mistakes that America has made. And for the same reasons, is there's a parasite class in Russia, just like there is in every country in the world now. It has a lot of money, that only cares about money, that has no loyalty to the country or the people of the country where they were born or where they make their money. I mean, you understand that not just in Russia, but, throughout the world, every billionaire on this planet is a parasite and a thief. There's no human being that ever worked hard or smart enough to earn $1 billion, which is $1,000 million. Every billionaire on this planet is a parasite and a thief who made their money through swindling their workers or through speculation or through, straight out stealing. In Russia, in the 90s, people just came in and they said, hey, I'll buy that factory for $100, and it was worth 100 million. And they bought it, and then they're like, well, I've got the title to it. It's my factory. So yeah, that's the problem with Russia. The problems that have infected the United States and Europe are also very serious threats to Russia.
So this parasite class, which side is Putin on in that sense?
I do not believe. I'll put it like this, and I've said it before. I do not believe that Putin is one of them. I do not believe that they control Putin. But it is obvious through history of the last 10 years, at least, through empirical facts, that Putin does not control them either.
How do you see that?
So well, I mean, look at the Minsk agreements where, it can't be explained by stupidity. When everybody here knew from 2015, everybody in Donbass knew that the Minsk agreements were a scam, that they were just a trick by the Ukrainian army to stop. I mean, back then, the DPR army, the Donbass armies could have taken the Ukrainian army, at least as far as Kharkov and Odessa. And we were stopped because of the Minsk agreements, because of diplomatic trickery. And everybody here knew that it was bogus and that it was a scam to trick and rip off Russia, which it was. And so if a taxi driver or a school teacher in Donetsk knew that it was a trick, how can somebody in the Kremlin not have known? How could they not have known?
What is the reason why these people, to me, sounds like they are in cahoot with the West? Why have they not been purged?
That's an excellent question. That is the question that everybody here in Donetsk asks every single day. And not just in Donetsk, but all serious patriotic Russians ask that question every day. I mean, when you see the Minsk agreements, when you see the so-called mistakes of the military campaign in 2022, when you see the economic policies of the Ministry of Finance and the Russian Central Bank that are working absolutely against the interests of the Russian state and the Russian people, you have to say, how can no one see this? How come nobody's doing something about it? And so that's why, like I say, Putin is not controlled by him, but he doesn't control him either. He doesn't control him because they're still getting away with way too much. And the biggest danger to the future of Russia as a country and as a people is not NATO. It's these quislings and traitors and parasites in Moscow.
Do they provide any value for Russia at all?
No, how much value does a mosquito provide you, bro? How much value does a tick or a leech provide you? They suck your blood, bro. They don't, they suck your blood and they take it somewhere else. And unfortunately, for some reason, the people who could do something about it, maybe they can't. Maybe there's something I don't know. But they aren't doing anything about it so far.
What I've heard is that these people on the other side of Putin, they are so intertwined in the economic system of Russia that you cannot get rid of them. And that is supposedly the excuse why they haven't been purged.
Well, that's very possibly the case, and, I would think that if Joseph Stalin was in Vladimir Putin's shoes today, he would be able to think of a way to purge them, no matter how intertwined they were. He would think of a way that was about 9 millimeters wide that could permanently cure them from their treachery to the country.
One thing I would like my audience to know is what I mentioned before. You moved to Donbass. Why, when, and what exactly happened? And what was your involvement in the conflict? How did it look practically?
Well, I'd always been interested in politics. I'd always followed history. I'm an autodidact. I'm self-educated, so I learned by reading, not by what teachers taught me in school. And, in the 20th century, I understood, Yugoslavia in the late 1990s. Bill Clinton destroyed a sovereign country, the most successful Eastern European country at the time. He bombed it, destroyed it with NATO. Then comes 9/11, which I understood very shortly after it happened that it was a complete inside job. It was done by the U.S. government, by the Mossad, by traitors, inside, in New York City and in Washington, D.C., and in Tel Aviv and elsewhere. I understood that, I understood that the attack on Afghanistan was totally bogus. The attack on Iraq with the WMDs that never existed, that was totally bogus. The attack on Syria, where they said, oh, he's gassing his own people, which was totally fake, false flag.
Yeah.
I understood that. I saw the murder of Muammar Gaddafi. And bro, that really pissed me off because I knew, I was one of the very few Americans who understood who Muammar Gaddafi really was and what he did for his country and for Africa and for the world. And when he was murdered on totally bogus pretenses, the most successful country in Africa is now a slave market hellhole, failed state. And just the same, when I saw what happened in Ukraine, I was 54 years old. But, I just, I would have felt like a punk if I just said, oh, I have to put the sad face emoji on my Facebook comments, because of the people that were slaughtered in Odessa, And then Odessa, May 2nd, scores of people were burned to death, beaten to death by Nazis just because they didn't want to be controlled by Nazis. A month later, June 2nd, the Ukrainian Air Force made an airstrike on the Lugansk administration building, slaughtered, a dozen civilians. And after that, and they'd done the same thing in Mariupol already before that. After that, there was a woman who was killed in that airstrike. And there was a photograph taken of her. Her name was Ina Kukaruza, a woman with red hair. And she's basically laying on the ground on the sidewalk in front of the administration building. Next to her legs, both of her legs were like, shredded to hamburger and blown off. The woman she'd been talking to is laying next to her, dead. But Ina Kukaruza was still alive for a couple of more minutes. This dude comes up, he's filming with his phone. And she looks straight at this dude and she says, can I use your phone to call my family? She knew she was dying. And when a photo was made from that video where she's like basically looking, straight into the camera. And when I saw that photo, it was like she was looking straight at me and straight into my soul and asking me, what are you going to do about this? Are you just going to make the sad face emoji or the angry face on Facebook? And I'm like, no, I'm going there. I'm going to go fight Nazis just like my grandfather did. I'm going to kill the killers, and I'm going to defend the defenseless people like this woman, Ina Kukaruza. And I made that decision when I saw that photograph. And I told my family, and they were like, oh, yeah. You're going to Novorossiysk. Uh-huh, yeah, sure, And as soon as I could, my plan was to be there in 2 months. It took me like 3 more months longer than that to get the visa and to sell all my stuff and get the money together. But I made the decision in June, and on the 7th of December, I was in Donetsk and joined the army a week later and served as a soldier, as a rifleman and as an RPG gunner on the front line in combat, very, very heavy combat at Donetsk Airport, Visolia Village, Spartak, Avdiivka, front line positions where you shoot and get shot at every day. And I did that through 2015, and I went back in 2017 and did it again for 4 months. So I didn't come here to be, to make money or make a name for myself or, be an internet star. I came here to fight in the war, and I did. And to be honest, I didn't expect to live to see the spring. From December till March. I thought I didn't think I'd make it that long, and I came so close, so many times that it's a miracle that I did. But I came here to defend Donbass, and that's what I've done with weapons in my hand, and now with words and with deeds, and with my human aid work and stuff like that. It's all the same. It's all the same war: the economic war, and the military war, and the political war. They're all combined. They're all combined, and I've worked on all three fronts. And there's people who have done more than me on each one of those fronts. On the military front, there's guys that have fought longer and harder than me. On the economic front, there's guys that have brought, more human aid than I have, although I've, been involved in almost $1 million now after 10 years of human aid that I've brought to Donetsk. And there's guys that have, got more followers on their YouTube channel than me, because of course my YouTube channel was deleted by YouTube, last year. So there's guys that have done more than me in each of those areas, but there's nobody that's done more than me in all three of those areas.
Are you still
I'm not
active?
bragging. What do you mean? Am I still active, dude? Do you know where I am right now? I'm in fucking Donetsk, dude. I'm under shelling every day. You see what this is? What do you think? That's airsoft? I raised 90,000 rubles today for human aid. Today,
Good.
I took a dozen camouflage nets to the guys on the front in Petrovsky district today. Me and my wife in Petrovsky district, very front line positions, very dangerous work. And we do that every day, and we don't get paid for it. So hell yeah. I mean, I make videos every week. I write articles every week. I got a Telegram channel with 15,000 subscribers, which I hope you'll give the link to
Of course.
whoever's watching this and smart enough to want to get the real news from the real front line. So yes, I'm still active as fuck every day, dude.
How
I
long do
didn't
you
come
plan
here
to be active?
until I die. And or until the war is over with the Russian victory. That's how long.
Do you
What
want
else is there to
me?
do, dude? I'm defending the future of humanity here. Until it's safe, the only job I have is to work to defend it.
Do you want me to give the chat the link for your VK?
Sure, of course. VK, Telegram, especially Telegram. Yeah, of course. Trolls are welcome too. I'll make fun of them and then kick them off.
Your wife, is she Russian?
No, she's she was Ukrainian. Now she's Russian. She has a Russian passport. She was born right here in Donetsk, bro, in Petrovsky district.
I'm Slavic. I'm Slavic.
She's Slavic. Slavic. I mean, Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, that's all one people with, artificially drawn borders on a map. But the people are all the same.
Did you have any prior experience as a soldier?
Yeah, I served from 1981 to 1984 in the U.S. Army. I was a combat engineer, a sapeur, demolition specialist. I served 2 years in Germany and the rest in the United States. And I didn't have any combat in Germany. We were on the front line position. That was back during the Cold War. We were guarding the border, East German, Czechoslovakian border with West Germany. And we were on front line where we could look through binoculars and see Warsaw Pact soldiers looking through binoculars back at us.
You're gonna be staying in Donetsk then?
Yeah. This is my home. This is my wife and I. We have a small house with a big garden in Petrovsky district. We haven't lived there since the last year and a half because it's under very heavy shelling. Our house has been hit, not directly, but shells that have fallen around our house within 100 meters have damaged windows, roof, siding, at least on 3 different occasions so far. We have a friend who has an apartment in the center of the city, which is also pretty hot and dangerous, but not as dangerous as Petrovsky. So, also in Petrovsky, the water doesn't work as much. The electricity, the internet is a lot less reliable than in the center. So we've been living in the center of Donetsk for the last year and a half. But our house, our home, is in Petrovsky, which is very, very close to the Mariinka front. It's well within artillery range, and bombs, artillery shells fly over our house pretty much every day there.
I've heard that Ukraine has been using cluster ammunition in Donbass since the beginning, and are still doing it now.
Not since the beginning, but they have been. They've just received it from the United States, say in the last 6 months or so. But I can confirm personally that they're using it. It's U.S. Cluster munitions. It's rocket and artillery shells that pop open in the air. These cluster bombs go down. They're multiple, like mini grenades. They have a shape charge that can cut through armor, and they also have a fragmentation case that's very dangerous, fatal to people in the vicinity. Just yesterday, 4 teenage kids found one of them, and they were playing around with it, making a video showing, "Hey, I found this." And the kid in the video got killed.
Oh shit!
His 3 friends got seriously wounded. This is cluster bombs, bro. They are over 100 countries have signed a treaty not to use them because they're inhumane, and also because they tend, like say in an artillery shell, there's 88 grenades, bomblets in one artillery shell. When it pops open in the air, they fall to the ground. Maybe 50, maybe 60, maybe 40 of them go off, detonate when they hit the ground. It's an impact fuse. But some of them don't go off. And what the cluster bombs that the United States is sending to Ukraine, they're like from the first Iraq war, dude, from like 1991, so they're very old, they're very obsolete. They tend to have a lot more misfires. And then each one of these things, it's like a little kid finds it and it didn't explode. So they're like, oh, it's not going to explode. And but it can have a hair trigger. You can touch it. A cat can step on it and it'll go off. So yes, cluster munitions. I can guarantee from personal firsthand knowledge that they're using them not only against the troops, but also against the civilians and the citizens in Donetsk and specifically in Petrovsky district.
Have you met other Americans helping the Russians?
Yeah.
What is your... Well, go ahead.
I've had a few friends that came here from the United States to help out. They pitched in the information war and the humanitarian aid war. They're, there's good American people. There's millions of good American people. I'm not against America. I'm not against the country. I'm not against the people. I'm against the fascist government. You understand? Benito Mussolini, the founder of the fascist party in Italy, he said fascism could better be called corporatism because it is a merger of state and corporate power. And that's exactly what exists in the West these days. But it's not a merger like the state and the corporations are equal and working together. It's like the corporations own the government. They own every political prostitute in the Congress. They own the president. They own, all the major judges, all the governors, nothing, the rich people call the shots in America and the corporations. And so that's the definition of fascism. I'm against fascism. And so are millions of good American people. Now, I mean, the majority of people in America these days are shit eaters. They literally are shit eaters. And they're so stupid, they're not qualified to have an opinion about anything. And yet they think they know everything. And, they're really, I mean, I read a book once that defined evil as militant ignorance. Say that with me, bro. Say evil is militant ignorance.
Evil is military ignorance.
Militant ignorance, yes. And you know what? That defines a lot, the majority of people in the United States these days. They're so stupid they don't even know how stupid they are, but they will fight you to the death, and they'll get a bunch of their friends and stomp you to death if you try and tell them the truth, because they don't want to know the truth.
Are you surprised by how many Americans are supporting the Nazis?
Yeah, I am. I mean, because I didn't think that, I didn't think that people could sink so low, that they could be so stupid, that they could be so cowardly and so hypocritical. And yet they amaze me every day by being more so than I could have ever imagined. Certainly than I could ever be.
I feel like it's half the country.
It's more than half, bro. It's more than
Yeah.
half. And that goes for Canada and almost all of Europe too, at least.
There's been some talk about people implying that China is restraining Russia's capabilities in Ukraine. What do you think about this?
Well, I certainly appreciate all the help and support, political and otherwise, that China has given to Russia during this very difficult time. Personally, I'm not saying that China is not a good ally. I'm saying that China puts its own interests first, far above anybody else's. I think that China understands that the United States, if the United States is able to defeat Russia, it will immediately turn its guns on China. And just like what the United States is doing in Ukraine, where they say we'll fight to the last Ukrainian and we don't care, we're going to sit back across the Atlantic and watch Ukraine and Russia fight and diminish their population and diminish their economic resources, I think there's a very good argument could be made that China is doing the same thing. You know, I mean, between watching the U.S. and Europe fight against Russia, and both of their detriments, and yet China sits back. I mean, you know, China understands that America is their real enemy. China understands that Russia is a very significant competitor, potential competitor. And I mean, I'm a communist, you know, so I'm not against communist China, although I don't think what China has is really communism these days. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to live in China. I've seen the way that society is geared there, and I could not stand to live under that kind of a deal.
Why is that compared to Russia?
Well, I mean, I don't know about Russia, dude. I haven't really lived in Russia, but I've lived in Donbass for the last 10 years. And this, I can guarantee you, this is the coolest and greatest and freest and strongest part of all of Russia is right here in Donbass, man. I mean, Donbass is to Russia what Texas is to the United States. And, you know, that's not just like, you know, something poetic or something. You know that Texas in 1836 was a part of Mexico, and Mexico had a change in government, a military coup. They changed the Constitution. Texas said, we're not going to live under this new Constitution. And they fought a revolution against the Mexican army, and they won. And for 10 years, Texas was the Republic of Texas. It was its own country. And then they had a referendum, and they joined the United States. And, you know, 170 years later, almost the exact same thing happened in Donbass. You know, Donbass had a revolution against a military coup d'etat. They were their own republic for 9 years, and then they had a referendum and joined Russia.
Did you join the referendum?
Yeah, of course. I voted yes, of course. Like, you know, every intelligent person here did, you know. I mean, for me, I didn't join for Donbass. I didn't vote yes for Donbass to join Russia. I voted yes for Russia to join Donbass.
Did you meet any of the people that voted against it and talk to them?
No. I mean, whoever voted against it did it secretly, and I mean, you know, they would have been either laughed or beaten out of town if they had publicly said that they did. I mean, you understand that to vote against the referendum was to vote to remain in Ukraine, which is to vote to stay under the power of the people that have been bombing and murdering us in Donetsk for 10 years. So that would be a very, very hard sell, you know. So, you know, whatever the few hundreds probably of people that voted against it, you know, they might have, you know, whispered it to their wife in the bedroom, but they never said it publicly. I've never heard of anyone saying publicly that they voted against it.
What is your opinion about the Wagner soldiers?
The greatest military unit in modern history, certainly in the 21st century. One of the legendary units of, all military history. Those guys, what they did in Bakhmut, and it's like, it's beyond legendary. It's almost unbelievable, except that they actually did it. I mean, fighting war is an art and a science. There's, the most important and deepest book on how to conduct warfare was written 4,000 years ago. It's called The Art of War by Sun Tzu, Chinese general.
Mm-hmm.
Or excuse me, not 4,000, 2,500 years ago. And it's a very short book. Every person should read it to understand what it says. And basically the principles that he wrote 2,500 years ago absolutely still apply in every war since then and to this day. And there's, fighting a war, it's a science, it's been going on so long, there's certain rules. It's like physics, or, it's like, boxing or anything like that. There's certain things that you learn how to do, and that, if you do this, you can win. And if you do that, you will always lose. One of these immutable laws of military science is that for an assaulting force to have the hope of being victorious against a dug-in defensive force, because people, that haven't been in a war, haven't been in the army, there's a lot of stuff about war that they don't understand, but basically, if you're in a defensive position, you've already got like protection around you. You've already got a bunch of boxes of bullets right next to you. You've already got, food and water behind you. You already got some more guys that can come, replace you when you're tired, or, can evacuate you and replace you if you're wounded. When you're attacking, you only have what you bring with you. You have to bring all your bullets with you. If you get wounded, somebody has to take you, 2 or 3 guys got to carry you back all the way to where you came from, so to defend is always much easier than to attack. And in military science, they say that to have hope of victory in an assault against a dug-in defensive position, like Bakhmut, for example, you have to have a numerical superiority of at least 3-1. That means you need 3 attackers for every defender to have hope of victory. And Wagner went into Bakhmut with 40,000 men against somewhere between 50 and 60,000 defenders. So not only was it not 3-1, it wasn't even 1-1. And yet Wagner took Bakhmut.
Yeah, they did very well in
So
Bakhmut.
so that's, that's not just legendary, that's, to be studied for however much longer war goes on, because, and what it was these guys, it's all about determination. It's all about morale. It's all about, a fearless willingness to give your life for victory. I mean, one guy with a sharpened shovel that's defending his own land can take on 10 guys with Kalashnikov rifles and beat them. If those guys, if they're, a bunch of untrained, frightened conscripts, they'll drop their rifles and run away the first time the guy with the shovel splits somebody's skull. So it's all about morale. Wagner had morale because they had magnificent leadership. They had leaders that were willing to live and die right beside their men on the front. They had excellent training, and they were inspired by the ideas that they fought for.
Did
certainly weren't.
Did Donetsk experience less shelling after the fall of Bakhmut?
What do you think, baby? Did Donetsk experience less shelling after the fall of Bakhmut? Not really. Not really.
Okay.
It's been, I mean, throughout 2022, the shelling here was the heaviest it's been in the whole 10 years of the war.
Okay.
In Donetsk. But since the last couple of months, it's decreased significantly from the heaviest days. But it's still, all the summer was heavy. But the last few weeks, it seems to have calmed down a little bit.
I got a question from a chatter here. He's asking you, do you think the socialist or the communist politicians or influencers are in the West, Europe, and the US, and do they have any actual power in those countries?
No. The communists, the so-called progressive parties, the socialist parties, have all been co-opted. They've been bought out and taken over by posers and traitors. Look at the Green Party in Germany. It's literally sickening. You look at, the civil rights movement in the United States that once was about equality for minorities, and now it's like Black Lives Matter, and it's it's not about equality. It's like, my great-great-grandfather might have been a slave, so you owe me $1 million. It's been co-opted. It's it's a joke. Politics is a joke. In Europe and the United States, only idiots vote. Only idiots vote for any political party. Only idiots, waste their time on any kind of political bullshit. The only thing that can save the US and Europe is a revolution like the American Revolution of 1776, the French Revolution of 1791, the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, or the Donbass Revolution. That's the only thing. Anything other than that is, a half-ass poser joke.
Do you think any of that will happen in America?
I hope so. I think that, I'd say that 95% of the people in the United States are, useless pieces of shit. And, and they're too stupid to know how stupid they are. The difference between ignorance and stupidity is someone who is ignorant doesn't know the facts or the truth. And that can be fixed. by explaining and by teaching them what the facts and the truth are. But someone who is stupid doesn't want to know the facts or the truth because they think they already know them and they're totally wrong. And they, again, it gets back to the definition of evil, militant ignorance. They don't want to know, and they will fight you if you try and tell them. And that's a majority of people in Europe and the United States these days. And it's tragic, but it's true. And really, there's no cure for them. But, if there's 5% of people who understand what's reality and understand what the stakes are and understand that this is a fight for the future of humanity and are willing to do what needs to be done, well, there's 360 million people in the United States. So 5% is, 17 million people. And if they get together, and they and they don't quit until they straighten things out, that's the only hope for the United States and for Europe. The yellow vests I really admire in France. There's been a lot of pretty militant protests starting across Europe these days, and in Germany in just the last few weeks, we've started to see a lot of people out in the street. They're mostly waving flags and singing songs and holding signs, but that's a step in the right direction. But as far as voting, that's a fool's errand. Only idiots vote in the United States or in Europe for anybody.
What made you become a communist, and when did it happen?
When I was very young, bro. I was born in 1960. So I grew up in the time of the Vietnam War, when it was still going on, when the United States was still fighting, when my friends in junior high school had brothers that were drafted and sent to Vietnam. And, in Texas, it's very conservative, very patriotic, la, la, la. But I always loved to read, and I thought, well, let me find out the other side of this question, of this war, because why do our guys have to go all the way to Vietnam to fight and get killed? What are they doing over there? What are they defending? And so, I was a voracious reader. I loved to read, and I went to the library after school. And I found some books by Ho Chi Minh. And I read them. And then I found books by Che Guevara, and then I found, the Communist Manifesto, and I started reading these, and I understood, I understood that the United States had no business in Vietnam, that everything they did there was a crime. And that when people that live in a country get invaded by a foreign army, it doesn't matter what the excuse is, those people have the right to kill whoever comes to their country with guns. And so I understood that the Vietnamese were just defending themselves, their own homes, and that that's the most basic human right that there is. And that it was the United States who were the invaders and the criminals. And I just went from there. I kept on reading. I learned about the history of the labor movement in the United States, in the 1930s and stuff, before the Second World War. The Wobblies, the whole, since, the 1880s, fighting against, oligarchs and capitalist exploiters, and so, I went to Cuba for a month in 1995. And in the United States, to call yourself a communist, I mean, literally in many people's minds, it's like worse than saying, "Oh, I'm a rapist or
Yeah.
a pedophile or something like that." And so, I was a little bit, shall we say, chicken shit, but I called myself a socialist. I believed in, that, housing and medicine and education and, the right to a job and stuff like that, should be financed by the wealth of a country, that there shouldn't be people that, didn't have enough food to eat or, couldn't buy medicine and died because they couldn't afford health care, or that couldn't go to college, even, some guy, some poor, a plumber or something, he's got a whatever musical prodigy kid, but he can't afford to buy a piano or send the kid to take piano lessons, and it could be another Beethoven or something. So I went to Cuba in 1995 and I had a conversation there with the captain in the Cuban army. And I said I was a socialist. And she said she was a communist. And I asked, well, what's the difference? And she said, a communist is someone that's willing to fight for socialism. So I said, well, then I guess I'm a communist. And I've been calling myself a communist ever since,
Nice. Yeah. Do you have time for more questions?
Yeah. Sure, bro. Let's see, what time is it? We're good. 2 hours? Yeah, sure, man. Bring it on.
What is your prediction of the end of Ukraine? What do you think will happen? We can also maybe go through which cities do you think will fall?
Well, I don't think any cities will fall, but I think some will get liberated.
Yep.
For me, anything less than Russian control of Kiev and everything east of Kiev, including Odessa, from Kiev down to the northern tip of Moldova. Anything less than that is a failure to achieve the goals of the special military operation. If Russia, and hopefully it can happen by the end of this year.
You think
Russia,
so?
I mean, I'm not saying I think so, but I hope so.
Okay.
But I mean, the Ukrainian army is now spent. The United States is not, has reneged on sending them, more weapons, more ammunition. The Europeans, are starting to, fade away too. Russia has the opportunity to go on the offensive like it could have done and should have done last year and finish the job, come down from the north, perhaps with the help of Belarus, take control of Kiev. Once they take Kiev, then, there's no use in fighting anymore, for the Ukrainian army. And so once they take Kiev, with a simultaneous advance coming down from Belgorod, come from the Russian border, from the northern Russian border into Ukraine, and from Donbass westward, surround Odessa, make Odessa surrender. Then it's a done deal. And then a lot of hard work begins. But at that point, Russia has achieved its goals. It's denazified, demilitarized, the majority of Ukraine. And I mean, everything west of Kiev, Poland wants to steal anyway, and let them do it. And let that be like the East and West Germany of the 21st century, But, to say, oh, Russia's just going to take the 4 oblasts, Kherson, Lugansk, Donetsk, and Zaporozhye, that does not cut it at all. That does not cut it. For Russia to go, to the Dnieper River does not cut it, because the Dnieper is the main source of drinking water for all of eastern Ukraine. If the Ukrops are on the other side, the Nazis are still on the other side of the river. They have the potential to do some kind of chemical or biological attack. Also, the Dnieper is a major material transport, waterway down to the Black Sea. So, no ships can transport anything if they have to go down the middle of, a battle zone. The Ukrops can shoot anytime. So, the 4 oblasts don't cut it. The Dnieper doesn't cut it. It's got to be Kiev at the minimum, and that should be enough, because if they do that, if Russia can come through and make an overwhelming military defeat of Ukraine and NATO, because, bro, believe me, my friends on the front, they're telling me, some of these units that they're fighting, it's almost 50% mercenaries and NATO soldiers in Ukrop uniforms these days.
Okay.
So Russia's already fighting NATO. If they can smash it in Ukraine, then the Europeans are going to say, okay, we don't want it anymore. We don't want to escalate. The United States will keep fighting as long as the Europeans are stupid enough to keep fighting with them, because the United States is on the other side of the Atlantic. They don't have to worry about their cities getting blown up. They don't have to worry about, Berlin becoming Bakhmut,
What about
But
the Nazis that would be hiding in the west of Ukraine? How would you be sure you kind of get them?
well, let them go. There's a lot of Nazis in the west of Ukraine. Let them go and let them be the problem of Poland, the Polish are already tired of dealing with the ones that have run to Poland so far. Of course, it's not going to be easy. Of course, even if Russia just takes, to Kiev, which, eastern, what used to be the eastern part of Ukraine is very much pro-Russian, ethnic Russians. The brainwashing and the propaganda has been intense. It's been applied scientifically, and it's been 24/7 for a decade. So a lot of people that would have said, hell yeah, I'm Russian back in 2014, now they've drank the Kool-Aid. They've fallen for the lies. So it's going to be difficult to re-educate people. Russia had to do the same thing after the Second World War. There was a lot of OUN banderistas. They called them the foresters. They went for 10 years. They were like partisans hiding in the forest, coming down, committing terrorism and stuff against the Soviet Union after, the Soviet Union liberated Ukraine. And they're going to have to do it again. But the only other alternative is to let them stay in Ukraine in power and to stay, collaborating with the Western European and American Nazis and continuing to provoke and escalate against Russia. So, it's, there's no happy solution, but for Russia to take control and smash down hard on any kind of militant resistance is better than for it to just let it sit here and fester and continue to grow.
Okay. There's a question here from a chatter. Is Russia accepting foreign nationals into its military? And what about Russian language requirements?
Yes. I mean, it wasn't Russia, but the DPR accepted me. I came here in 2014 and joined the army a week after I got here. And I didn't speak Russian very well. And there still are, PMCs that accept foreign, qualified foreign volunteers. I mean, anybody that doesn't speak Russian and doesn't have significant military experience, probably isn't going to get taken. I can say that, 98% chance they're not going to be interested.
Okay.
I mean, and you're lucky for that because, I can tell you, things were way, way different when I joined up, but, I was pretty crazy to come here and not speak Russian. I mean, and I had military experience, and I even had some, pretty much close to combat experience before I came here. But, to not speak Russian and come here and not have military training, not only are they not going to take you, but you can be glad that they don't, because, it'd basically be like these Ukrainian conscripts. You could end up on the front line for, about 4 hours before you got killed.
What would be the best way for Westerners to try and help Russia?
The best way for Westerners to help Russia is for them to help themselves, for them to stand up. First of all, to understand that Russia is not their enemy, that the real enemy of the people of the West, of Europe and the United States, is the parasites that own your government. The genuine fascists, the, merger of corporate and oligarch and government power. And you have to deal, it's going to end up like this. If the people, the 5%, the 15 million decent human beings that still live in the United States, if they don't denazify their own country, then the Russians are going to have to come in and do it sooner or later. And if the Russians have to do it, it's not like they're going to be landing there. It's going to be like one really big fireball and it's all going to be over. So best chance is for the people there to understand who their enemies are and to understand the stakes. This is victory or death. The people that own the Western governments, that control the governments of Europe, of Canada, of the United States, of Australia, of New Zealand, they're going to do to the citizens of those countries, what the Europeans did to the Native Americans of North and South America, what the German Nazis tried to do to the Slavic people of the Soviet Union, which is exterminate most of them and enslave the rest. So, on your feet or on your knees, understand who your enemies are, treat them accordingly, because it's either you or them, and understand that, yes, in that kind of a fight, you'll probably die, but you might have hope for future generations of humanity. And if you don't, then you will certainly die on your knees, begging, and there will be no hope for the future of humanity. So, I mean, I'm a communist, but I'm also a Russian Orthodox Christian. I believe in God. I believe in a life after this one, a different world besides this one. I believe that what I do in this life determines what my life in the next life will be. And so I try and do the right thing. I try and make the world a better place. Our job is not to save the world. Our job is to save our own souls by trying to save the world, by doing everything we can, by willing to even sacrifice our own lives to save the world, to make a better world for other people. Like Jesus said, there's no greater love that any man has than to give his life for his fellow man. And he also said, Jesus also said, God is love. And Che Guevara, he said, at the risk of seeming ridiculous, I have to say that every real revolutionary is guided by great feelings of love. And that's really what it's all about, man. I mean, we're here to make a better world for everybody. That's the job of us all. The stupid and the cowardly, they're just in it for themselves. But every decent human being wants to make a better world and share it with everyone in it. And that's what I'm doing here. And that's what, Russia is the obstacle to, with these parasites, these Nazis, Bill Gates and what's his name, Schwab, and these,
Schwab. Yeah.
these, all these guys, I mean, they're genuinely evil. I believe in God, so I have to believe in the devil too. And these guys are working for the devil, dude. They're totally evil. They're satanic. And so it's us or them. This is Armageddon. This is the spiritual fight for the future of humanity and for each of us, for our own souls. So don't be afraid. That's like the most basic, best advice that I can give you. Do not be afraid. Courage is the key to happiness, because it is impossible to be happy if you are afraid. And so, of course, all these people that, they worry about, if I'm not going to, make enough money to pay the rent, or, somebody's not going to like me, or I'm not going to, go on a, people that are so stressed out and afraid of everything, they're miserable, man.
Yeah.
And I mean, and not just from the point of they feel miserable, they're miserable human beings. They're, they're detriments to themselves and to society. Don't be like that, man. Be brave, be cool, live like a hero. And if you die the next day, then at least you lived like a hero, and it. And even if there is no God, even if there is no other life, you still set an example, and so that's what I've done here, man. That's how I live. And I'm the happiest I've ever been in my life, dude. I'm 63 years old. How many men in the West, in Europe and America, my age, they can say these are the best years of my life. They sit around, they drink, and they're like, oh, I wish I was 20 again, and I had those hot chicks and used to go out and had a good job. I don't care about any of that stuff, man. I'm doing what I was born to do. I'm fulfilling my destiny, and all of our destiny is to make a better world for everybody. And and to the extent that we do it, and it's not just like talking about it or hitting like on Facebook, but if you actually do something about it, then you'll be happy. You'll have fulfilled your destiny. You'll have meaning in your life. And there's nothing better than that. There's nothing better than that.
Nice. Very nice. What is the future for you?
Well, I'm continuing my work as an information warrior and as a human aid volunteer. That's very important work, and I enjoy doing it because I'm good at it, and it it keeps me busy and it keeps me happy, and I'm helping a lot of people by doing it. I still have my machine gun. I still have my rucksack packed with stuff, to go to the front if the Ukrops invade the city of Donetsk where I live. I'll be a very dangerous partisan. They will be the ones that meet me will be sorry. So hopefully, people here sometimes ask me, they say, when do you think the war will be over? And I tell them, I say, I know exactly when it's going to be over. They're like, what? Really? When? And I say, after our victory and not before. And so, after Russian victory, that's when the war will end. It will not end until Russia defeats Nazism, both Ukrop and NATO in Ukraine, in such an overwhelming way that the Nazis in Europe scurry back to their holes. The Nazis in the United States don't want to cross the Atlantic. We'll see how it goes from there. Who knows? It could be World War III. We could all get, vaporized in the next year, in a nuclear exchange that goes global or something, there's a lot of hot spots in the world. Certainly we've seen just in the last day or two in Gaza and Israel, that's some serious stuff right there. Syria is still a very hot place. Africa, there's a lot of conflict going on there, but for me, I hope I'm a refugee, man. I live in the center of city in someone else's apartment because it's too dangerous for my wife and I to live in our home in Petrovsky district. I would like to go back there. We had a great garden, bro. A great garden, tomatoes, watermelons, apples, berries, grapes. We used to make some great wine. I'd love to go back there and get that garden going again. It's all overgrown now. I haven't taken care of it for two summers now, I'd like to do some gardening, raise some kids, cook some barbecue, play guitar out by the campfire, and drink some homemade wine. That's what I'd love to do, but not before we take care of the work that needs to be done.
And last question, we do know the answer. Will you be going back to America ever?
Maybe. But if I do, I'll be going with the Russian army to denazify and liberate. But not, probably not otherwise, because, I'm considered like a terrorist there. There's no specific law that I know of that I've broken, but I can see how even, journalists like Graham Phillips or Lena Lip have been persecuted. There's no way that I'd go back to the United States unarmed.
Okay. Thank you so much. This was perfect. Thank you so much.
All right, man. Send me the links, man. I'll share them for sure.
I will. Thank you again. Have a nice evening.
All right. You too. Bye.